Marigold Whitlock stood at the far end of the aisle in Savannah Grace Cathedral, her heart pounding so loudly she could almost hear it echo off the polished marble floors. Soft clouds of rose petals floated down from the balcony above, drifting in the late afternoon light that filtered through the towering stained glass windows. Each pane shimmered with jewel-toned blues and crimsons, casting a kaleidoscope of color across the rows of pews where family and friends had gathered. The gentle scent of lilies mingled with the faintest hint of myrrh, and somewhere ahead, the organist's soft prelude promised the most important moment of Marie's life. She smoothed the folds of her ivory gown for what felt like the 100th time, brushing a stray curl of chestnut hair from her temple. All week she had imagined this instant, walking toward Ezra, her fiancé, whose reputation for bold investments and eccentric generosity had once seemed larger than life. He had promised her unwavering devotion in the glow of these same candlelit aisles. Now, seconds before she was to recite her vows, her phone buzzed in the pocket of her satin clutch. Mari lifted the phone as though its screen might unravel her future. The message was brief, crystalline in its finality. "I'm sorry, I can't." No explanation, no plea for understanding. Just the cold text that shattered years of whispered dreams. She felt the cathedral spin, as if the grand domes above were tilting on their foundations. Her lips parted, but no sound escaped. Behind her, a gasp spread through the congregation like wildfire. Photographers brandished their cameras, frantic for a reaction, flashes popping so rapidly that Mari's world turned bleached white. Murmurs rippled through the guests, whispered questions, scandalized gasps, the rustle of silk and crisp tuxedo linen. Aunt Clementine's hand trembled at her side. Cousins exchanged awkward glances. The choir faltered in mid-note. Mari gripped the edge of the marble altar rail, fingertips slick with nervous sweat, as the hush deepened into something akin to disbelief. Then, from a side door off the chancel, a new presence strode in. Caspian Holloway. His entrance was so unexpected that the organ's final chord hung suspended in the air. He was tall and impeccably dressed, dark hair neatly combed back to reveal sharp features and storm-gray eyes that swept the room with calm authority. Whispers followed his every step. Caspian, the reclusive tech magnate, Ezra's older brother, the man who never attended family functions and whose public persona had always been steely, unapproachable. He carried no bouquet, offered no conciliatory smile. Instead, he paused at the center of the nave, tapped the microphone stand until it crackled to life, and spoke in clear, unwavering tones. "I cannot stand by and watch this day become a disgrace to our family's name." His voice resonated through the high ceilings. "To protect Marigold's honor and the Holloway legacy, I take her now with my hand and my heart. Right here, right now." The cathedral erupted again, this time in startled gasps and nervous laughter that wavered between incredulity and relief. Mari blinked, scarcely believing what she'd heard. The hush that followed was electric. All eyes turned to her. She felt Caspian's gaze find hers, steady and unwavering, and in that instant something shifted. The pain of Ezra's betrayal still stung, but here stood a man ready to rewrite their story on the spot. Mari drew in a shuddering breath, lifted her chin, and, awash in a swirl of petals and possibility, she nodded. The hush that fell over Savannah Grace Cathedral, after Caspian's bold declaration, felt almost sacred. Candles quivered in their wrought iron holders, as if caught between fear and hope. Mari's heart thundered in her chest, but her eyes never left Caspian's steady gaze. He gave a small nod to the bishop, who rose from the carved wooden chair behind the altar, and tapped the pages of his prayer book. His voice, rich and measured, filled the vast space. "By the power vested in me, and in the name of love that transcends all contracts, I now continue this ceremony." Mari felt her throat tighten with emotion. She moved gracefully to stand beside Caspian, her hand trembling as she slipped it into his. The bishop smiled kindly at her, and for a moment Mari thought she saw tears glint at the corners of his eyes. Guests leaned forward, breath caught, as if the cathedral itself were holding its breath. The chandeliers above twinkled like distant stars, and the choir resumed, voices rising in a gentle hymn that seemed born of both wonder and relief. When the time came to exchange vows, Caspian brushed a strand of hair from Mari's face and spoke with a quiet clarity that surprised her. Marigold Whitlock, he began, his voice steady. I promise to honor your courage and your kindness. In scandal or in serenity, I will stand by your side. I give you my hand, my heart, and my word that every day will find me worthy of the trust you have shown. Mari's pulse quickened as she listened to each word, savoring the warmth behind his measured tone. She closed her eyes for a heartbeat, gathering her own strength, and then opened them to meet his gaze once more. Caspian Holloway, she whispered, voice trembling with adrenaline and awe. In this moment of upheaval and grace, I choose you. I promise to stand with you in honesty and in hardship, to nurture what we build together, and to keep no secrets between us. The instant her words fell into the air, a ripple of proud applause swept through the congregation. Tears glistened on the cheeks of women in silk gowns, and men in tailored suits bowed their heads, moved by the sincerity between the two of them. Photographers erupted into a frenzy of light, cameras clicking so furiously that for a moment, Mari thought dawn had broken inside the cathedral. Paparazzi at the back jostled for position, shouting questions they would record later as headlines. Through the chaos, Caspian retained his composure, shielding Mari gently with his body as the bishop pronounced them husband and wife. A final, resonant chord from the organ signaled the end of the ceremony, and the cathedral doors swung wide to admit the warm glow of the gilded afternoon. Stepping into the entryway, Caspian draped a protective arm around Mari's shoulders. Guests surged forward, offering bouquets of roses and toasts of champagne. Marie allowed herself a small smile as she tasted the bubbly sweetness on her tongue and nodded graciously at each well-wisher. She noticed the local press scribbling furiously, their notebooks already filling with scandal-tinted speculations, but she did not flinch. Instead, she glanced at Caspian, who caught her eye and gave a reassuring squeeze of her hand. Outside, a sleek black limousine idled on the flagstone drive, its polished surface reflecting the cathedral's stained glass like a mosaic of broken promises made whole. Caspian helped Mari into the car, smoothing her train and brushing stray petals from her hair. As the door closed behind her, he slid in beside her, closing the divider to shield her from the world for just a moment longer. Mari leaned back against the plush upholstery, her heart still racing but tempered by the promise she heard in Caspian's soft voice. We did it, he murmured, his breath warm at her ear. Mari exhaled, letting the tension drain from her shoulders. The engine purred to life, and as the limousine rolled away from Savannah Grace, she realized that in less than an hour she had lost one future and gained another, unexpected, profound, and blazing with new possibility. The late afternoon sun slanted through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Caspian's Manhattan penthouse, turning the pale marble floors into pools of gold. Marigold sat on a sleek leather settee, smoothing the folds of her gown as she watched Adelaide Sinclair, the family's long-trusted attorney, arrange the documents on the polished glass coffee table. Merrick, Caspian's personal aide, hovered discreetly by the door, his crisp suit pocketed with envelopes of signed checks and press statements. The apartment was impossibly quiet. Every delicate detail from the Japanese silk pillows to the rare orchids in the corner, reminding Marigold that she had traded her simple life of fresco restoration for a world of high stakes and hidden dangers. Adelaide cleared her throat softly. Mrs. Holloway, Mr. Holloway, she began, her tone brisk but not unkind. The prenuptial agreement reflects everything we discussed. No shared finances, no public statements that damage the Holloway brand, and the usual clause allowing divorce without alimony after 12 months of separation. Mr. Holloway, we've also included your stipulation regarding intimacy. She lifted a page headed Marital Boundaries, then looked directly at Caspian. Is there anything else you wish to add? Caspian rose from his armchair and moved to stand beside Marigold. He unbuttoned his jacket, revealing a crisp white shirt and a faint crease of vulnerability in his posture. One more clause, he said, his voice low but unwavering. He retrieved a fountain pen from his breast pocket and inscribed 3 handwritten words beneath the final signature line. No lies between us. The ink glistened. Marigold's breath caught. The phrase was so simple that at first it felt almost theatrical, and yet, standing there in the soft glow, she recognized its weight. Her entire life up to this moment had been built on half-truths and carefully managed impressions. She bent forward, her sandals slipping slightly on the marble, and read the words aloud. No lies between us. Every fiber in her chest tightened. Adelaide tapped the contract with her pen. An unusual provision, but if that is your wish, she gestured to Marigold. Mrs. Holloway? Marigold folded her hands in her lap, her heart drumming. She glanced at Caspian, whose eyes were fixed on hers so intensely that the rest of the room seemed to blur away. I will sign, she said quietly. I accept. The words felt both terrifying and exhilarating. As Adelaide passed the documents across the table, Marigold lifted the pen with unsteady fingers. She traced her name, feeling the pen's tip tremble beneath her palm. Each flourish of ink felt like a promise, not just to a contract, but to an uncharted future. When she finished, she looked up to see Caspian's throat tight, his storm-gray eyes glinting with relief and something softer. Hope, perhaps, or wonder. The papers were collected and placed in a black leather briefcase. Merrick stepped forward to whisk them away. Outside, a line of press cars idled on Fifth Avenue, their tinted windows reflecting the late daylight. Caspian moved to Marigold's side and offered his arm. She took it, surprised at the warmth in his touch. Together they left the office, pressing a button to lower the blinds and create a thin barrier between them and the world below. In the silence of the private elevator, Caspian raised his voice, softer now. Thank you for trusting me. Marigold turned to him. Thank you for making me trust. He released a breath he seemed to have been holding and guided her toward the sleeping quarters. The walls there were lined with books, first editions of poetry and rare folios of 19th century art. He paused in front of a portrait of his grandfather and gestured toward an armchair bathed in afternoon light. Sit with me, he invited. She perched on the edge of the chair, clutching the contract in her lap. Caspian settled beside her and slipped an arm around her shoulders. He tilted his head so his cheek brushed hers. I know this arrangement is far from ordinary, he said, his voice hushed, but my heart needed honesty more than anything else I've ever owned. Marigold rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the steady beat of his pulse through his silk shirt. And my heart needed a chance to believe that what I say matters, she whispered. They sat in that quiet haven for a long moment, neither speaking again. Then Caspian drew back slightly and brushed a strand of hair from Marigold's face. His hand lingered at her jawline, gentle as a caress. Marigold's breath fluttered as he lowered his lips to hers, a soft, searching kiss that held promises of truth and vulnerability. When they finally pulled apart, Marigold saw in his eyes the first glimmer of a smile. Tonight, he murmured, we'll let the world wait for our truth. She nodded, feeling a fierce warmth spread through her. The room seemed to bloom around them. The orchids exhaled floral warmth, the books caught the light, and the contract lay on the table. 2 signatures bound by ink and unspoken vows. In that sanctuary above the city, they discovered that honesty, once surrendered, could be the most intoxicating form of devotion. Late that evening, the city lights filtered through the towering windows of Caspian's private study, casting long, golden reflections across the dark mahogany panels. Marigold sat behind his broad desk, her fingers tracing the grain of the wood as she tried to steady her racing thoughts. Earlier, Caspian had invited her here for a quiet dinner, but the silver tray delivered by his personal aide had instead borne an unexpected burden. A thick dossier stamped with Ezra Holloway's name. Caspian stood by the window, arms crossed, his silhouette sharp against the skyline. He did not speak at first, and Mari watched the tension in his shoulders, guessing that whatever lay in those pages weighed heavily on him. Finally he turned, his storm-gray eyes reflecting remorse. I owe you an explanation, he began, voice low. About Ezra's disappearance. Mari drew a breath, bracing herself. Why did he leave me at the altar? She asked softly. The question felt more brittle than she intended, but she needed the truth before her heart could rest easy. He moved to sit across from her, placing the dossier between them. Ezra wasn't running from you, he said gently. He was running from debt, the kind that has teeth. He tapped the folder. Iron Veil Capital, it's not exactly a bank. They fund volatile crypto ventures. Ezra got in too deep. Mari's chest tightened as she opened the folder. Inside were spreadsheets of numbers, hastily scribbled interest rates that soared above ordinary usury, and letterhead from Iron Veil's lawyers demanding payment of $9 million within 48 hours. Her vision blurred for a moment, and she looked up at Caspian in shock. 9 million? She whispered. He could never have repaid that on his own. Caspian nodded slowly. He borrowed against the family trust. I covered his losses twice before. But Iron Veil isn't charitable. They threaten to expose every Holloway asset and drag our entire name through the mud. His jaw clenched as he spoke. That's why I orchestrated the wedding. The media whirlwind gave us cover to restructure those liabilities discreetly. Mari's breath caught at the revelation. Everything, her humiliation, his sudden appearance, even the vows she had just spoken, had been part of his plan to protect family honor and defuse a dangerous threat. She closed the dossier and looked at him with a mix of admiration and sorrow. You saved him, she said, voice thick. You sacrificed our privacy, even our future, to shield him. He met her gaze steadily. Family means more to me than anything. Ezra has been reckless, but he's still my brother. Mari's heart ached for the younger man she barely knew. She stood and crossed to Caspian's side, touching his arm gently. I don't care about contracts or headlines, she said quietly. I care that he's hurting, and that if he doesn't get help, things will only get worse. Caspian's features softened in surprise. You're not angry? She shook her head, stepping closer until their knees almost touched. Anger won't save him, but compassion might. Her voice grew firmer. I want him to enter a rehabilitation program. Proper counseling, financial restructuring, something real. I know a place, the Ark at Newport Bay. They specialize in addiction recovery for families of high net worth individuals. We can cover his treatment without making it public. He regarded her thoughtfully, the lines around his eyes easing. You want to rescue him? I want him to have a second chance, she answered, her eyes bright with conviction. And I want you to see that protecting him doesn't require hiding forever. Transparency sometimes heals more than secrecy. For a moment, Caspian remained silent, as though tasting the truth of her words. Then he reached out and clasped her hand, his grip warm. Your honesty is more powerful than any clause I could invent, he admitted. If you believe in this, we'll do it. Together. A weight lifted from Mari's chest at his agreement. She smiled, a real, unguarded smile, and squeezed his hand. We'll bring him back, and maybe in the process, save ourselves from living behind walls of silence. Caspian rose and guided her to the window, standing close so that their reflection merged in the glass. The city's lights flickered around them like distant promises. He tucked a stray curl behind her ear and whispered, Thank you for reminding me why no lies between us was the most important clause of all. Mari rested her head against his shoulder, breathing in the faint scent of teakwood and the faint undercurrent of rain on concrete. Outside, the skyline held its vigil, indifferent and eternal. Inside, two people bound by sudden vows and shared courage prepared to extend that grace to another soul lost in darkness. In that quiet moment, they understood that real love was not a contract to sign, but a commitment to believe in second chances, even when the first promises had nearly been the last. The ballroom at Chicago's Astor Grand Hotel gleamed under thousands of crystal chandeliers, each prismatic drop casting rainbows across satin gowns and polished tuxedos. Marigold waited by the grand staircase, her heart fluttering like the soft feathers of a songbird. Tonight she wore the emerald silk dress Caspian had chosen for her. Its vintage cut hugged her waist, then flared into a sweeping skirt that whispered secrets with every step. Around her, the city's elite circulated with long-stemmed champagne flutes and hushed admiration. But Mari felt as though she had stepped onto a stage set only for the two of them. Caspian appeared at her side, immaculate in midnight blue tails, his storm-gray eyes lighting up the moment he saw her. He offered his arm, gentle yet insistent, and together they descended the staircase amid a swirl of flashbulbs. Reporters lurked at the foot of the stairs, their notebooks poised. Mari could feel the weight of their scrutiny. Each camera flashed a tick of a clock, counting down to the reveal of Holloway's latest spectacle. Yet when Caspian guided her onto the crowded dance floor, shielding her with the press of his body, she found a sliver of calm. They moved through the throng to a reserved alcove draped in white roses and frosted greenery. Waiters wove through the guests, balancing trays of caviar-topped blinis and petite quiches. As they accepted their crystal flutes, a small group of patrons whispered greetings, curious to witness the newlyweds who had turned scandal into fairy tale. One elegant matron asked Mari about her work restoring frescoes, and Mari found herself smiling, telling them not of grand exhibitions but of a dusty chapel in Savannah, where she had once coaxed color from cracked plaster. A spark of mischief filled her when someone asked if she had another unexpected rescue to share. With a playful glance at Caspian, she leaned forward and began the tale of the bat, a tiny creature she had found caught in the museum's display case late one evening, its wings shredded by a falling shard of glass. She described how she had wrapped it in her scarf and carried it through silent marble corridors to the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, her voice softening at the memory. At first the listeners leaned back in polite surprise, but as she spoke of the bat's first flutter of freedom, laughter bubbled from Caspian's lips. His genuine amusement rang clear, startling in its warmth amid the ballroom's practiced refinement. Caspian caught Mary's eye still smiling, and for the first time that night the world felt less like a performance and more like a private moment shared between two people who understood each other. As the orchestra shifted to a waltz, he held out his hand. Mari placed her fingers in his, and they glided onto the polished floor beneath a cascade of candles. Their bodies moved in soft arcs and spins, breath sinking, hearts finding a quiet rhythm. Around them, the gala continued its measured splendor, but Mari felt only the gentle press of Caspian's hand at her waist and the steady beat of his heart against her ear. Midway through the dance, Caspian spoke so quietly that Mari barely caught the words above the music. "I built walls to protect myself. Tonight, when I saw you saving that bat, I realized how hollow a fortress can feel without someone brave enough to breach it." His gaze held hers with an earnest intensity that made her pulse quicken. She pressed her cheek against his shoulder and whispered back, "I choose to trust you, walls and all." When the final strain of the waltz faded, Mari opened her eyes to find Caspian's proud, vulnerable smile. He brushed a tendril of hair from her face and bowed his head, a gesture of respect and wonder. In that private pause, surrounded by opulence and curiosity, they discovered that love, unexpected, courageous, and shockingly real, could light the darkest hall like a single brilliant candle. They walked off the dance floor together, hand in hand, ready to face whatever the world's next headline might be, knowing they had found something far more important than any story the press could ever tell. A crisp autumn wind rattled the windows of the Holloway penthouse as Marigold stared at her phone screen, heart pounding. The screen bore a story from one of the city's most sensational tabloids. Bride of the billionaire caught in gold-digging scam. Below the headline, a collage of images showed Mari in conversation with a sleazy-looking reporter next to screenshots of emails supposedly written by her, plotting to extract the Holloway fortune. She felt bile rise in her throat. Down the hallway, Caspian's study door swung open and he emerged, polished suit unruffled but his eyes stormy. "What is this?" he demanded, snatching the phone from her hand. His voice was low, taut with anger. Mari watched his jaw clench as he read the article, his grip tightening on the phone until his knuckles whitened. "They're using forged correspondence," Mari said quietly, swallowing the lump in her throat. "Ezra must have sold those fabricated emails to the tabloids." Caspian's face paled. "He broke out of rehab? I thought he was getting help." His voice caught on the word help as though it tasted sick. He dropped into a leather armchair, head in his hands. "My board is already calling, asking if this scandal was orchestrated to distract from our quarterly losses. They're demanding I dissolve the marriage." Mari's chest tightened. She crossed the room and knelt beside him, placing her hand on his arm. "You're not alone in this," she said firmly. "We'll face them together." By mid-morning, the Holloway boardroom was suffused with tension. Portraits of past patriarchs watched impassively as directors in crisp suits exchanged whispered fears. Caspian sat at the head of the table, dark circles under his eyes, while Mari stood beside him, composed despite her own racing heart. The lead director cleared his throat. "Mr. Holloway," he began, voice clipped. "After today's headlines, the board must consider the negative impact on our stock price. We require assurances, publicly, that the marriage is either dissolved or that these allegations are false." His gaze flicked to Marie as though expecting confirmation of her perfidy. Caspian took a steadying breath. He looked to Marie. She met his eyes and nodded once, resolutely. He stood. "I understand your concern," he said, voice calm but firm. Tomorrow, my wife and I will hold a press conference. I will present evidence that these so-called emails and messages are fabrications, created to shame my family and destroy my brother's life. There was a moment of stunned silence. Then murmurs rippled through the room. The board chairman inclined his head reluctantly. Very well, but this cannot fail. That evening, Savannah Grace Cathedral's courtyard, where Mari had once stood abandoned, now served as the backdrop for a very different gathering. Floodlights bathed its rose-lined arches in warm light as a sea of cameras and reporters waited. Mari felt a tremor in her fingertips as she clutched Caspian's hand. He squeezed it reassuringly. Stepping up to the podium, Caspian's normally measured voice carried steady authority. Good evening. I stand before you to defend my wife's integrity and the truth of what has occurred. He signaled to Mari, who slipped a flash drive into the podium's playback slot. A hush fell. On the large screen behind them, audio timestamps and email headers appeared. Then, cutting through the hush, came Mari's voice. Calm, unwavering, reading messages she had recorded in real time with Ezra's own admissions of coercion. You know they'll print anything. Ezra's voice crackled. I have leverage. I'll sell lies unless you help me. The clip ended. Gasps rippled through the crowd of journalists. Mari stepped forward, voice clear. I did not plot to extort the Holloways. My only crime was loving a man in need of help. Ezra Holloway blackmailed us both. Today, I release these recordings so that no one else is fooled by his lies. Questions erupted, rapid fire. But Caspian raised a hand and cameras clicked to silence. The evidence is before you. My brother will return to the Ark for the rehabilitation program we arranged. As for us, he paused, looking directly at Mari, I choose to stand by her truth. That night, newsrooms exploded with updated headlines. Billionaire and bride expose blackmail plot. Holloway marriage stronger than scandal. By morning, stock tickers reflected a rebound as investors regained confidence. The board reconvened and, in a unanimous vote, reaffirmed Caspian's leadership and announced an internal review of Iron Veil's practices. In the quiet that followed, back in the safety of the penthouse, Mari sank into Caspian's arms. He brushed her hair from her face and kissed her temple. You were incredible, he murmured. Your honesty saved us. Mari rested her head against his chest, listening to the steady beat that had once rattled with doubt but now pulsed with renewed trust. We saved each other, she whispered. Outside, the city lights twinkled, indifferent witnesses to a couple who had turned a betrayal into a triumph, forging a bond stronger than any contract could ever promise. The ocean had turned a bruised shade of indigo by the time the storm struck, and Marigold felt its first tremor in the soles of her feet, softly vibrating through the polished teak deck. She and Caspian had boarded his yacht for what was meant to be a brief crossing from New York to a private research retreat off the coast of New England. Business obligations had drawn him back early, but he had insisted she accompany him, promising an evening of quiet conversation beneath the stars. Now the sky was roiling with angry clouds and the wind had risen to a howl that rattled every porthole. They were in the salon when the first wave slammed against the hull, sending the antique crystal decanter and all 5 of its crystal glasses shattering against the far wall. Caspian's normally controlled expression flickered with alarm as he hurried forward to steady her. He gripped her upper arms, guiding her toward the companionway. Stay low, he shouted, voice nearly lost in the roar. We'll head to the engine room and shut down the main generators. They stumbled down the narrow stairs, water sloshing in rivulets over polished brass railings. The hatch to the engine room slammed behind them, and in that sudden darkness, the hiss of seawater rushing through the hull filled every corner of the confined space. A warning klaxon wailed. Caspian flicked on the overhead lamp, its yellow glow revealing oil-coated machinery and steam. Already the bilge pumps were straining, but the angle of the vessel had thrown cables and valves across the floor, making movement treacherous. A second, more violent impact rocked the yacht, and the lights flickered. Marigold watched, heart in her throat, as Caspian knelt beside a control panel, his suit jacket heavy with spray. He reached for the emergency shutdown lever, but a surge of water burst through a leaking pipe, drenching them both. Marigold slipped on the slick metal floor and crashed against the bulkhead. Pain flared in her elbow, but adrenaline surged, propelling her upright. She saw Caspian fighting to keep the engine from overheating, cursing softly under his breath. Marigold moved to help, reaching for his hand, But another blast of water burst over the machinery and a section of piping tore away with a deafening tear. Steam filled the compartment, hot and sharp against her skin. She coughed, vision narrowing. Caspian twisted toward her, eyes wide with both fear and something more vulnerable. "Mari, we have to get out," he yelled above the roar. "The bulkhead is jammed. I'll try to free it." He lifted his jacket to wedge it between the flooded grate and the door, bracing his shoulder against the frame. The storm thrummed through the fiberglass walls as if the sea itself sought to swallow them whole. Marigold pressed her hand to his back, feeling his muscles tense through the damp fabric. The roar of the generators was drowning everything in metallic thunder. Then between the thunderous waves and the screaming alarms, Caspian's voice cut through with startling clarity. He straightened, water cascading from his hair, and grasped both her hands in his. His gray eyes, normally so guarded, glowed with raw emotion. "Mari," he said, voice low and trembling, "I need you to know something. That clause, no lies between us. It was never about legalities. It was a shield for my fear. But I haven't been honest. I've loved you since the moment you said yes in that cathedral. I've loved you through every storm, literal or not, that life has thrown at me." Her breath caught. The engine room, the flooding, the violent pitch of the boat, it all receded into silence around those words. She pressed her fingers to his cheek, the rough stubble beneath hers a reminder of the man who built walls around his heart. "Caspian," she whispered, her voice steady though her heart thundered. "I never believed vows could be more than words until I heard you speak yours now. If we die here tonight, I want you to know that I love you with every piece of myself." He brushed a hand through her damp hair, eyes shining. "Then let me prove it," he murmured. He swept her into his arms, lifting her out of the rising water until her chin rested on his shoulder. Water lapped at their knees as he pressed his lips to her temple, then her forehead, each kiss a promise of survival and devotion. They clung to each other as the storm pounded the steel hull. Marigold felt the tremor of the yacht's engine stutter, then cease. Silence fell, broken only by the muffled roar of wind overhead. In that stillness, they held one another, two souls tethered amid chaos, believing that love could anchor them against any tempest. Footsteps echoed overhead. A hatch creaked open. Light spilled in as crewmen and rescue divers, harnessed in safety lines, swarmed down into the engine room. Panic flickered across their faces at the flooded compartment, then relief as they recognized Caspian and Marigold entwined in the yellow lampglow. "Thank God we found you," a voice called. A diver handed Caspian a flashlight and clasped Marigold's arm, guiding her toward the ladder. Together they climbed, wet and shaken, but alive. On deck, rain still fell in relentless sheets, but the storm's roar had receded to a distant growl. The rescue vessel pressed alongside, ropes tossed over the rail. Caspian helped Marigold into the waiting life raft, then climbed in beside her. As they were lifted onto the rescue deck, Marigold wrapped her arms around him, pressing her face against his chest. He tucked her close, his cheek resting atop her head, breathing her in. Around them, the sea glimmered under the early dawn light, each wave gentle now. It felt miraculous. It felt like a second beginning. Caspian brushed rain from Marigold's hair and whispered, "I promised my hand and my heart. Tonight I vow more than ever to keep you safe. Not because of a contract, but because I love you." She looked up at him, eyes bright with tears and relief, and kissed him fiercely, a vow of her own. In the calm after the storm, they stood together on the rescue deck, anchored at last by a love stronger than any waters could undo. A year has passed since the storm that nearly claimed their lives, and Savannah Grace Cathedral glowed once more in the soft morning light, its rose-adorned facade welcoming a select gathering of family and dearest friends. Marigold Whitlock stood at the threshold, her lace inset gown flowing like a river of ivory, and she felt a familiar flutter in her chest as she waited. Today was not the wedding day she had once imagined, nor the one that had been so hastily rewritten, but a vow renewal that would mark their true beginning. Behind her, the hush of the congregation rippled with anticipation as Caspian Holloway emerged, unbuttoning his tailored jacket to reveal a simple white shirt, his demeanor at once regal and unguarded. They met at the altar beneath towering columns wrapped in living vines and blushing roses, the scent of gardenia drifting on a gentle breeze. Caspian took Mari's hands in his storm-gray eyes warm and steady. He cleared his throat as the minister smiled knowingly, and then, without contract or clause, he spoke from the heart. Marigold, when I first asked you to be my wife, I offered you protection in my family's name, but I kept my heart behind walls of fear. Today, I give you more than promises penned in ink. I give you my whole self, every fear, every hope, every dream, and ask only that you walk beside me as my equal, my partner, and my love. Mari felt tears gather at the edges of her fingertips, and when her turn came, she let the honesty she had fought so hard to embrace pour forth. Caspian, you taught me that the greatest courage comes in the form of truth, and you showed me that love can rescue us even when life seems at its fiercest. I once signed a contract to honor your family's legacy, but that contract is no longer what binds me to you. I bind myself to you now, by choice, by hope, and by a love that grows stronger with every passing day. Her voice rang clear through the rafters, and the congregation responded with quiet, heartfelt applause. The minister then pronounced them renewed in love, and as the final amen echoed, a hush fell over the gathering. Ezra Holloway stepped forward, no longer the fledgling gambler who'd fled the altar, but a sober man in simple linen, bearing 2 rings crafted from melted fragments of his own gilded heirlooms. He approached Marie and Caspian with genuine respect, offering them each a ring that bore the subtle imprint of broken beginnings remade whole. For everything I lost, he said, voice earnest, these rings stand for second chances, and for the love you two have shown me, even when I did not deserve it. Caspian took Mari's hand again, sliding Ezra's ring onto her finger, the metal warm and weighty with meaning. Then Mari placed the other ring on Caspian's hand, and he squeezed her palm gently, eyes glistening with gratitude. The afternoon sun filtered through the stained glass, painting their joined hands in hues of emerald and gold, a living testament to forgiveness, renewal, and enduring devotion. As they turned to leave the cathedral hand in hand, Mari leaned into Caspian's side, whispering, "Last year I stood here abandoned and alone. Today I stand here chosen and cherished." He kissed the top of her head, the silk of her veil brushing his cheek, and replied, "And I promise, for as long as I shall live, to choose you every day." Together they walked down the aisle of Savannah Grace, free of contracts but bound by something infinitely greater. A love born in crisis, tempered by truth and destined to last a lifetime.